the number of young Latinos with chronic asthma issues has grown. And there is a correlation when you map it out between where these dirty power plants are and where our population live. Oftentimes, we have an environmental justice issue where we're not so, politically adept perhaps at advocating on our behalf to ensure that these power plants are either shut down, cleaned up, or not placed there in the first place. Unfortunately, many of these are very, very old. We live, that's the next step, within 30 miles, many of us live within 30 miles of a power plant. When I was in Houston, I saw something that was very striking. They took me to the Cesar Chavez Elementary School. It's a magnet school, and I thought, oh, this is going to be really cool. Wow. So we get there, and lo and behold, the school is surrounded by, I think it was 2 power plants and 3 chemical plants. The kids were playing soccer. The soot on their clothes after they were done playing, they were gray. Their uniforms were gray by the time they were done playing. And it was not because they were rolling around in the dirt. This was not a pretty sight. It was unfortunate. They tried to fight it back, but then this is where sometimes our politics get played against each other. Because Cesar Chavez, this is a hero, and we want to see schools with his name on it to highlight the importance of his role as a civil rights leader. And it's a magnet school. It's like an amazing school with all the highest technology, and yet after the chief has landed, I don't even want to know what kind of toxic study, if they ever even did an analysis of the water table or anything else of what was there prior to, because obviously those plants have been there for a long time. One of the things, too, we need to think about with the Hispanic community is our immigrant population. More and more we're seeing Latinos having to leave their countries because of environmental challenges, whether it's major mudslides or hurricanes, flooding, etc. And these are causing drought, economic and social problems, i.e. it dislocates people. They cannot get jobs. They're going to go where the jobs are to feed their families. So it's just something to bear in mind. If you look at some of the national security, the Department of Defense National Security Plan, that's actually a factor that they are starting to consider, or have been considering for about 10 years. What does that mean, that dislocation of individuals because of environmental factors? So the social imperative, I don't know if you guys remember, I guess it was 2 years ago, the bridge in Minnesota that collapsed in the Mississippi. That's a serious infrastructure breach. There are many of those. I travel a lot, and I'll be driving along and I'll be stuck under a bridge, and I'm looking and I'm like, oh my God, that I-bar is hanging on by a thread. This is not a good thing, and you can hear the trucks rumbling overhead. And it's like, okay, let's get out of here. That's not unusual. That's not unusual, and it's beyond just highways. It's everything. Ports, with the growth of trade, ports have become more and more utilized. So that means that, they're bringing in more containers, etc. What does that mean? That means that those trucks, those diesel trucks that are pulling in, are standing there idling, putting out fumes, etc., which is not only bad for the driver, but it's bad for those communities that live around those ports. Because then again, those co-pollutant issues, you start to see sort of like mini hot spots, if you will, in those areas where those ports are. And that creates problems for those communities in turn, who have the whole other, do they have the resources available? Do they have the political power to fight back? How can they fight back? What can they do? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And with regards to this unmet infrastructure, this is what President Obama was referring to with the stimulus package. It's about this infrastructure that's really in need. And one of the things we have also found, I think it was the Economic Policy Institute came out with a study demonstrating how the investment in infrastructure actually has a growing kind of a domino effect all the way around. It's good because people can afford to go shopping, etc., and get back into that cycle. They're less likely to lose their homes. Those are higher paid jobs, especially if they're union jobs, and etc. So how do Latinos rate? Well, lo and behold, we don't carbon emissions as other ethnic groups, directly or indirectly. But this is what, okay, no jokes. We're full of hot air, but not that much. But look at how much we spend in comparison. We spend a lot more. And some of that has to do, if you think about the population of 25, I think it's 25.8 of the Latino population lives below the poverty standard. So when the price of energy goes up, obviously it impacts our pocketbook more. All the argument, it is, and it's hard. It's very difficult to convince a person who is struggling to make ends meet to go out and buy those expensive light bulbs, even if you do give them the argument at the long term. So we have to find ways to educate folks. One of the things that was very striking to me about when we had the conference at Disney, the woman whose name was Mrs. Green from Disney, who does all the environmental work, said something that was quite interesting. She said that they had a hard time getting their workers to understand why recycling was important and why they had to provide everything, et cetera. But once they got it, they took that home with them. So there was an added value lesson, and they understood why it was good to do that and what it meant to recycle and to be careful with what they were doing, and how ultimately not only would they do a good thing for the planet and their family and their children, but that they would be able to save some resources. So working poor and uninsured, as I mentioned, and about 25.8% of our families live below the poverty line. However, we are also more likely to be uninsured. And I know here in Florida that's a big issue. One of the things we see, especially in some of the service sector jobs, is that there will be, so in order not to have to pay benefits, oftentimes people are only required to work 35 hours a week. Oftentimes in the Latino community, we see this especially with women. We make women, I think the average is 58 cents to the dollar for a Latina. Part of the reason that's a problem is, apart from the obvious, is that we have to have flexibility. We are the main caretakers of our families. We're often intergenerational caretakers, and it's something that we have to keep in mind as we look for positions, etc. So we'll trade off the bigger wage for the stability of the position. Now, this is going to make sense in a minute when I talk about health. So all of this, we've talked about chronic conditions, we've talked about exposure to power plants, etc., to ports. So here we have this 35% of Latinos living in areas that are violating the federal air pollution standards, which lead to serious developmental problems in our children and oftentimes even in our adults. At this point, we're looking at second generation even. Sierra Club did a series of interviews with individuals who've been affected by things, and one of them that really struck me was a young Latina who has asthma. She has insurance for herself, but not for her child. She's only able to buy meds for one of them. So, the child has an attack, she'll give the meds to the child. The child, then she'll have an attack. She doesn't have any more meds. She has to go to the emergency room. Once she goes to the emergency room, she risks losing her job. She has to go back and beg and grovel, make sure she can keep her job, because she might be out maybe 1-2 days. It's a problem. It's a serious problem, and it creates this cycle that we have to figure out how to break out of in so many ways. High poverty rates also restrict our housing options. So in some ways, here we are, we're kind of stuck. Even though Latinos tend to migrate more than other populations, at the same time, we are limited to where we can live because we have lower wages, etc. So we have to find ways to make all of this work for everyone so that we can break out of the cycle and at the same time really begin to take advantage of the choices that are out there. Let me